Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Improving Compliance Manual Punches webinar, which is part of our new Mastering Blueforce, the weekly series, this one for the week of January the 23rd. Now, as we do with all of our sessions, we are going to mute everybody, so all attendees right now are indeed muted. So if you have any questions, any concerns that pop up during our today's session, please go ahead and use the control panel area. There's a little questions section as shown here in the screenshot. And type in your question there, send that over to me, and we'll address that at the appropriate time in our conversations today. Now, as a reminder to everybody, we are offering these weekly sessions. This will be an ongoing session that every Tuesday and Thursday we'll cover the same topic at 2 p.m. Central. And these webinars are being recorded and being made available online, and they'll be available online via the ISS Gateway site as well as on YouTube. And all documentation provided through here, to include the slides and any other references I may use, will be also posted to the ISS Gateway as well, so you will have that for your disposal. But the bottom line, the big purpose of the series is to kind of provide everyone, all of our Blueforce users, with the knowledge and critical tools needed to make navigating through Blueforce a lot easier, and obviously master the system. So today's webinar will be focused primarily on manual punches. I'll make some references to other metrics as it relates to the compliance scoring, but we're going to focus on manual punches for the duration of this webinar. And these are a couple items we'll be covering. We're going to go through and define what exactly is a manual punch. I'm going to go through also and kind of discuss, kind of a review for most of you, the difference between time cards and time sheets. And then we're going to go through and just show you who are the top 10 locations and kind of give you some statistics on how we're doing as relates to manual punches only. And then we'll wrap it up with tips on how to improve upon that manual punch score. Now, the first question obviously becomes is, what is a manual punch? So a manual punch can be best described as a, time punch that's entered into Blueforce by a supervisor or manager, and more specifically the editor, the submitter, or approver role, in lieu of having the employee punch in and out on their own. So essentially we're giving the employee a pass per se and keying in their time into the system, which is not the way Blueforce is intended to be used. Manual punches are always going to be based on worked hours. So if I'm one of your employees and I am supposed to be at the job site from 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. For the night shift for the 5 hours, I am expected to punch in at 5 and punch out when I leave the job site when I'm done at 10 o'clock or thereabouts. And to that point, it's worked hours that we look at. Your compliance scores that you see on there, we often get questions. What makes up that compliance score? Why do I have a 2.45 in a manual punch score? What's that entail? Well, that entails only worked hours. So if you're going in there and keying in time for a rate type that's related to worked hours, then it's going to be counted against you. Now, PTO and other non-work related hours, such as vacation, sick, jury duty, you name it, all those that are considered non-worked scenarios, those do not count against you and do not count towards that manual punch compliance scoring. So we are focused strictly on worked hours. If the employee is working and they are supposed to punch in, then those are the hours that we're looking at when it relates to manual punches. So once again, worked hours, we do not want worked hours being manually entered. However, the checkbox on the right there shows non-worked hours is okay. We can always key in PTO without being kind of slapped on that wrist, slapped on the hand, or kind of having a low compliance score. Now, going on more on manual punches, the number one reason for a manual punch, it seems to be kind of from our data collection and whatnot, is basically the employee simply not recording a punch. Okay, a manual punch can be an employee missing an in and out punch, or just missing an in, or just missing an out. We do find that The number one reason, bottom line, for a manual punch is that the employee is just not recording one or the other punch. It could be simply because, the employee had an issue at the device. Well, that's something we need to know about. If we do not know that there's an issue with the Walter device or there's an issue with the phone system, we can't get it corrected. So that issue continues to be an issue until someone says something weeks down the road. And by then, your compliance score is pretty much gone downhill. So one of the key things is obviously employees not recording a punch. Now, we do understand that employees will always forget to punch in and out on occasion, key on occasion, but we need to stay on top of them to continue to enforce that we have to have them punch in and punch out if they expect to be paid correctly. We want to put the burden of time collection on the employee. It should not be on the manager. It should not be someone sitting in the office. It should not be the president of the company or CEO. It should not be at that level. It has to be at the employee and as the employee's burden to make sure they punch in and punch out. Now, because there are instances where the failure to comply is an honest mistake, supervisor managers can be tempted to accept these omissions without questioning and simply enter the time in the system on the employee's behalf, which happens all the time. And we see this more often than not. If we actually, each one of us will actually go into Blueforce right now, into the time cards or time sheets, more specifically the time cards, you could actually see these situations right there in front of us if we kind of did some digging and some researching. We have also found that lower compliance scores typically indicate that the supervisors or managers are spending more time than is ideal fixing missing time records that may be the result of deliberate forgetfulness on the part of certain employees, leading to decreased productivity for the editor, submitter, and or approver, as well as inflated payroll and overtime costs. Bottom line, if we're having to see manual punches on a day-in, day-out basis, that takes time from obviously our busy days when we should be spending that time with our customer, spending our time out in the field, handling other issues instead of being in the office working on payroll. And I understand that number one, I don't want to call it a gripe, but the number one complaint maybe from all of us that are Blueforce users is that we're spending too much time doing payroll, and it goes right back to the employee. So we have to make sure that we are having the employee punch in and punch out. The number two reason, which is right behind the employee side of it, is the supervisors and managers are allowing the employee to leave without punching out. Now, I will share this funny statistic. I say it's funny, but it's actually really serious, and I refer to it as the Friday syndrome. If you go into your time cards and do a kind of analysis of your Fridays, I can guarantee that you'll see that your Friday out punches are a lot worse than your Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday punches, or even on the weekend for that matter. Typically, it's a thought process that the supervisor will say, you know what, you can leave early and I'll take care of it. Or if it's an unsupervised location, the employees are simply leaving and saying, oh, the clock didn't work, or the phone, I couldn't use my phone. These are all manual punches that have to be done later. This particular example is actually a partial punch because an employee typically will clock in for that Friday syndrome and then all of a sudden decide that they're going to leave the job site and not report that they have left. So this is not an acceptable practice, bottom line, regardless of them leaving early without punching out. Obviously, they're earning hours that they weren't at the job site for. And kind of from the manual punch perspective, and I'll just address it here, I'll say a little again later, do not just assume that someone was there for a 5-hour shift or an 8-hour shift. More times than not, that's kind of where the manuals lead to, because we assume that they were there the whole time. So reason number two, obviously, like I said here, is supervisor managers allowing that employee to leave early without punching out. And there'll be some, and I'll just kind of interject here that we've got some new views on the compliance dashboard that'll be rolling out next month. That one of them will look at this syndrome per se, and I think everyone will be pretty shocked that you will be able to see all those in detail and kind of go and see who's abusing the system, who's not, because a lot of sites you will find in the system, you may have 10 employees and 5 of them work perfectly fine, they punch in and punch out, but then you have 5 that always punch in and out every day except for Fridays, and they don't tend to leave early. And say it's a clock issue, the same clock that those other 5 used earlier in the day. So there are instances out there that our new compliance dashboard views will make it very clear what's going on. So the question always comes up, we're talking about manual punches, where do I fix those? Or, if I have to go back and put a manual punch in there because an employee had a clock issue or could not get their, couldn't use a phone for a reason, the cell phone wasn't working or bad service, how do I do that? Well, as everyone knows, there's two parts of the payroll module in Blueforce. There's a time card area, not the payroll module, but the time and collection piece. Time card piece, time card module, and a timesheet module. The time card module kind of is just the way I tell everyone is that's where the employee raw punches are always coming in. If the employee punches in at 7:07, it's going to show 7:07 until they punch out at 12:31, and it'll show that in and out punch on the time card view. Now, the time card view is just that, raw punches. Whatever the employee punch, it doesn't show any lunch rules, any pay differentials, the lunch break specifically. The only time the time card would show a lunch break is if the employee actually clocked out for lunch, not clocked out, did the start meal break option, and also then did the end meal break option to record the lunch. Now, majority of everyone on the phone call here and the majority of the company uses an automatic lunch deduction or has no lunch deductions at all. So the lunch functions on the clock, phone, mobile, etc. are not really utilized in those cases. But bottom line, time cards is for worked hours. So if someone works, 7:01 to 5:41, those punches will be reflected in the time card, and that's where you would go and add and change any hours worked. So once again, if I miss a manual punch, didn't punch in a day, I should do that on the time card side because that's where the worked hours reside. Now the timesheets are always going to reflect the time after the system calculation. So after an employee has punched in and punched out, the system goes through, applies the lunch rules, applies shift differentials, applies any union rules, any other pay rules that we have set up in the system, and then goes in there and applies that to the timesheet time. So you will see your raw punch, the total punch time, if you kind of calculate out on the time card screen, might equal to 8.1 hours. But you go over to the timesheet view, it's going to show 8 hours possibly, because at that point the timesheet is showing the rounding rules as well applied to that punch and the total time. So the timesheets, as I always tell everyone, is more of a summary view, kind of shows you what the employee worked and what is intended to be paid for at the end of the pay period. This is where you're going to go in there and add or change any non-worked hours. So anytime there's a sick situation, vacation, holiday non-work specifically, jury duty, bereavement, anything like that, you can do that straight over into the timesheet view. And in those cases, all you're going to do is the timesheet view is go to that particular timesheet, add a row, and then go to the specific rate type you need to use, for example, vacation or sick, and then go down to the day in question, which could be Tuesday, and simply put the number of hours that the employee would be paid for on that particular day. So in this case, 8 hours, just put in 8 hours on Tuesday, save it, you're done. Now the way the system works is the timesheet is just going to show you 8 hours. However, whenever you enter an entry into the timesheet view, the system, believe it or not, is actually backfilling that same entry over into the time card view. The only difference there is the time card view often will reflect kind of like a midnight to 8 a.m. shift or midnight to 8 a.m. work time. For 8 hours, you entered into the timesheet view directly. And that's just because the system is trying to put in a kind of checks and balances here. It's trying to make sure the time cards and the timesheets are in balance. So it's going to drop in 8 hours there. But those 8 hours, or however many hours you enter into the timesheet that appear back on the time card view, those hours are there because it's based on that default shift that the employee is set up to work on that job. So as most of you know, some of our default shifts out there are kind of just generic. They start at midnight and run, I think, from 0:00 to 23:59. It's kind of a generic shift. So that's why you'll find sometimes that the hours that are created for you on the time card view are not always corresponding to an actual time frame an employee would actually be at the job site. So bottom line, timesheets, non-worked hours. And like I said, remember that entering non-worked hours do not count against you on the compliance scoring. So you can enter vacation, you can enter holiday on work all day if you wanted to. Those do not count against you by entering them manually. All right. So kind of that time cards and time sheets, just so you understand once again, this is just the two differences of the two different phases, I guess you can say, of the time collection process. Time cards is the hours worked. Time sheets is for non-worked hours. All right, so how are we doing? So right now, the top 10 areas around the country as it relates to manual punch scoring only are as follows there on the screen. I won't read them all there. You can read them off. But those are the top 10 for manual punches. And I will give kudos to a couple of them that have quickly risen from say the 2.0s all the way up to high to mid 3.0. So these are the locations that are not having too much of a manual time entry being done. So kind of as a whole, and not to take away from some that are shortly off, just slightly off this list, overall of the 300 or so ISS districts that we have across the U.S. and Canada, 74 districts have a perfect 4.0 score on the compliance metric of manual punches, which that's a big group. 4.0, that's awesome. That's perfect. That means that 74 districts have no manual punches whatsoever. Now, 48 districts have a score between 3.5 and 3.9, which is also not too shabby. Obviously, that's a good amount. However, those two numbers together only represent 37% being in compliance. That means that we, as a company, must improve across the board. If you're not at 4.0, that means you have room for improvement. We want to make sure that we have no manual punches whatsoever being recorded. So the question becomes, all right, so we've got manual punches. We know that manual punches when an employee doesn't record a punch on the clock or on the phone or the mobile or the web. We know that. So how do we improve our scores? How can I change that trend? How can I turn it around? Instead of going south, I can take it north and go get that 4.0 score. So the first thing, obviously, and I've stressed this, several times already on the call, and I start sounding like a broken record sometimes saying this, but bottom line, the employee must punch in and must punch out. There can't be no leeway here. The supervisors at the job sites, the leads, those positions must make sure that the employees are punching in and punching out. I know we have some buddies out there that they try to take care of each other. If they're late, we want to blame the clock and say it's the clock's problem, not the traffic or me getting up late to get to work. Bottom line, we can't do that. We have to make sure employees punch in and punch out. Employees also must use one of the 4 approved time collection methods, and I'm going to review those one more time, but we have 4 approved ways of clocking in and clocking out. We have to use one of those 4 ways to clock in and clock out. Now remember that as the number of partial punches decreases and the number of manual punches decrease, so those 2, partial punches, once again, is just saying an employee has punched in but didn't punch out, or vice versa, or manual entries altogether being that nobody punched in or out, bottom line. In either case, those are manual punches together. The manual punch score will increase as long as we start taking care of those situations. Now, one of the funny things about this, and kind of how if you look at correction lag, if you look at time change, rate change, manual punch, and then invalid punch, those different metrics that we look at, they sort of kind of involve each other. You can help your score in multiple categories if you just focus on one. If you focus on manual punches, you're automatically going to help your correction lag score because there won't be many corrections to be made to start with. Secondly, if your manual punches you don't have any manual punches, typically your valid punches are 0 as well because are close to 0 or close to a 4.0, sorry, because you're having employees use the system, you're having employees punch in and punch out successfully without any issues. So all the metrics and kind of the theme as we go through the weekly series here, you're going to see there's going to be a little bit of overlap, but you're going to see that a lot of the topics can be taken care of if you just focus on one key area for that week and knock it out. And that's kind of what we've been doing. We've been reaching out to the different ISS locations and kind of saying, this is your scores. Let's see what we can do to help you and turn that around. So just a recap from, and I showed this slide for those that joined me last week, time collection method. Just to recap, these are the 4 methods that we want our employees to use to punch in and punch out. Now, we'll address here momentarily, we do understand that there are some sites that don't have the capability to have all 4 of these, or any of these tools at their disposal, and we'll go through that here in a little bit. But bottom line, 4 time collection methods that we want everyone using, or finding a way to use. First one is phone in, and as a recap, phone in is our call-in system. That is probably, it's right now the most popular method of time collection. However, that's going to be slowly taken over by other avenues. I'll explain that here a little bit. But phone in is your toll-free system. The employee calls a toll-free number. They enter their employee ID. And then based on their caller ID that's set up on the job record, it's going to automatically know what job they're calling from, and then just ask the employee to punch in or punch out, and they're pretty much done with their punch. They go to work, they call that toll-free number again to punch out. The Walter time clock, that's our biometric time clock. That's the combination of a fingerprint and the employee ID gets the employee to punch in and out to whatever job is on that clock. Web punch is our internet-based system where employee goes to a computer, whether it be a desktop, laptop, kiosk of some sort. So they go there, they log in, they click a button to punch in, and they have the ability to select what job they need, job, task, work order, etc. they want to work punch into there, all but from the comfort of their computer. And lastly, the most popular one, and the one that's gaining a lot of steam, is probably going to be the #1 method of time collection here in the next couple months. That's mobile punch. And mobile punch is the mobile app that's on the smartphones that are company-issued Samsung the J3 phones, or on tablets. If you need to download it there as well, you can go out there. The employee gets a login ID. They log into the smartphone app, or the mobile app, sorry. They essentially punch in and punch out, and that uses geosensing, which is another capability that we have now that basically confirms based on GPS coordinates if the employee was at the site or not. But bottom line, these are the 4 approved, acceptable ways for our employees straight across the board from U.S., from the United States and Canada to punch in and punch out. Now, I did mention that we do understand that there are some sites out there that either do not have the capabilities, whether it be they don't have internet, whether it be that they're in the middle of nowhere and don't have a cell service or reliable service, I guess you say, out there to communicate. Maybe there's a site that doesn't allow us to use their phone either. Maybe it's a government site or some top secret, location we clean, or a bank, financial institution, or stuff like that along those lines that may not want us to use any technology on site. You name it, there's a whole bunch of different scenarios out there, and I think most of you on this phone call will understand that there are some situations out there you can think of that may not allow us to use any one of the 4 methods here. I think that most cases, at a minimum, we could probably use a phone at a job site, or we have a cell phone assigned to that job site that we can provide the employees to punch in and punch out. So phone in is always a viable option. However, if we're spending the money to get someone a smartphone at a site, we are not going to use phone, and we're actually going to use mobile punch. That's the way to go. That's the most efficient and economical option on the board here. Now, if you have a large site that maybe you have internet, then you want to obviously use the Walter time clock, because the Walter time clock allows us to do a little more functions, especially if you have a group of employees. And the question I always get, and I get this almost on a daily basis, is, how many employees have to be at a site to get a Walter clock? And how much is a Walter clock? And I'll share with everybody. So right now, kind of the way it works is there is no cost kind of assigned. There is a cost, but there's no really true cost of a clock assigned to a job site. What we actually do is the cost is actually rolled up into an employee fee that we kind of, from an IT perspective, kind of roll out to all of our ISS locations. So a part of that fee it kind of encompasses all the costs of all the different methods here. So if for some reason you need a clock and you only have 5 employees and you really want a clock, then I urge you to go ahead and get a clock, because the clock is probably one of the better methods here. It's safe. It hangs on the wall. It's not going to run off on you. That's kind of a joke I tell everybody. But any of the technologies is automatically covered. So if you need a device, and once again, the clocks can be typically a good threshold of 7 to 8 minimum at a site. But once again, if you have 5 or you have less than 7 or 8, you're more than welcome to have a clock. We can talk about that in a little more details, and that's something we can catch up off this call. So the part of that, like I was going down the road there, is that we have sites that obviously are going to be true manual jobs. And what that basically means is manual jobs must be approved. They're not just going to be going in, and we're just not going to go on and say, all right, everybody and I'm not picking on anyone specifically, but let's say ISS San Antonio, we're going to say all your jobs are manual. Not going to do that, because we know that in most sites we can get a phone, we have a time clock, we have mobile apps available. We have ways of getting employees to punch in and punch out. However, manual jobs have to be 100% manual entry. So that basically means is, a job, we don't have a phone, we don't have a clock, it's 100% manual entry. And what we'll do is we'll actually go in the system, we'll go into JD Edwards as well in Blueforce and mark it in the system as a manual. Now, not only do we have to have that approved by our operations team, but we also want to make sure that the IPE pay team, which once again is myself, it includes myself, Tiandra, Jade, and Beth. The 4 of us, one of the 4 of us can actually go in there and mark your jobs as manual in the system. And all that's doing is just kind of letting us know that these are manual jobs. Okay. What we are doing right now is we have been working towards a dashboard view for your compliance dashboard in Hubble, in which that the view would update your manual punch scores and exclude those jobs deemed as manual jobs. But once again, those are jobs that are 100% manual. It's not one of those that are, we have 10 employees, 8 of them can clock in and 2 of them are not going to ever be punching in. That's not a manual job. A manual job is 100% manual entry. Right now, I'm slated to run that out about mid-February to everybody, and you'll get a nice email announcement with new links and stuff shared to those that are Hubble users, in which you can now see your new compliance scores, and they'll now take in consideration those manual jobs. So kind of some of the candidates, as I mentioned, for a manual job would be small jobs where there's no access to a landline and there's no cellular signal. And typically small jobs being also those jobs where it may not be, maybe it's a little bit cost prohibitive, or it doesn't make sense to spend money on a clock or spend money on a phone whenever you only have 1 employee working that site. So we can talk about those scenarios as well in more detail offline off this call. Also, some government jobs where there's no internet connectivity possible, nor employees able to bring cell phones to the job site. We do have a couple of those around the country where all the employees have to empty their pockets when they walk in. There's no electronics, nothing of that nature into that job site. Well, in that case, if they're not going to let us bring in our devices into the site, it's going to make it very difficult to punch in and punch out. So those we do understand. We just have to mark them appropriately in the system as manual jobs. And one thing I'll talk about more in next week's webinar is time changes. But one of the key things with manual punches is you need to stop making time changes. And it's correlated. It's a love-hate relationship here, because in most cases there's a lot of scenarios out there I can mention here on the phone call, is that a lot of employees will punch in and not punch out. So a lot of supervisors feel that it's a lot easier just to go in there and key in a new line and remove or change an entry that's already in there, and that is not the case. This is not how you do that. If an employee were to punch in, you want to obviously fill in the punch out manually. You have to do that to get a complete in and out punch. In this case, like I said, do not remove employee time punches from Blueforce to simply re-add them manually. It doesn't make sense, because you've done yourself a disjustice here, because what's going to happen is that now you have a double mark. You have a mark against your time change score, which I'll talk about next week, and you'll also have a mark against your manual punch score. It's a double whammy there. So once again, do not change the times that are in the system. Identify what is wrong with the time card first before you start messing with your punches. Too many times than not, we've had our ePay team has dealt with employees or Blueforce users that have gone in there and messed with the employee punches without really knowing what their intention was to start with. That is not a good thing. So identify what is wrong with the time card first before you start editing or messing around with any of the time punches. Keep in mind that you can also always change a job, task, and work order on a time card record without any penalty. Keep in mind, once again, if you do anything as far as time changes are referring to messing with the employee's in or messing with the employee's out punch. You can always change the job, you can always change the task, you can always go back and add a work order or change the work order without any penalty, because those do not count against you on the compliance rankings. We actually want you to allocate the time correctly. We want you to code the task correctly. We want you to show that there's a work order so our budgeting comes out correct. It is important that those get accurately entered in the system on the time record. However, do not mess with the in or out punch for the employee. More on that next week on the time change. We'll talk a little bit more here today, but more so on that for next week. But like I said there, do not change the employee's in or out punch. Now, we're talking about splitting time cards. It's also a big topic when it comes to manual punches, because a split kind of can contribute to having to create a manual punch. The splits do not count into your manual punch scoring. So what I refer to a split, there are two types of splits. The first one we're going to talk about is one that's called manually splitting a time card. And the reason I want to bring it up today, and I'll reference it a little bit next week as well on next week's webinar, is that the process of splitting in Blueforce allows you to take the total time an employee works and then reallocate it amongst multiple jobs as needed. So the example I wanted to give a little while ago, I'm going to go back one slide here, because one of the slides here talks about stop making time changes. Too many times that we've seen in the system, and if you ask myself, you ask Tian, or you ask Beth, or you ask Jade, any of us can tell you that this is just kind of an epidemic that goes on, because it's evil we go through. Because what happens is when an employee punches in and they work 5 different jobs in a day and they decide to punch out, all their time right now in that scenario is all to one job. So then as a Blueforce user, you might be thinking, well, you know what, that's not right. I want to go ahead and I'm going to delete that time and then go back and enter 5 lines of time to the right jobs as I need to do it. Well, that sounds right, but once again, you've changed someone's time. For one, you've basically removed the time, which is not a good thing. And 2, you've actually gone in there and created 5 manual punches. Those 5 manual punches are going to count 5 times against you on the compliance scoring. So that's a bad thing. So kind of going back to my other slide here, manually splitting a time card, what that basically means is that process is you're taking the total time the employee worked. In this case, let's say the employee worked 6 hours. You can actually break out that time by reallocating the total time worked, not the hours that they actually punch in and out. You're reallocating the total time that's been accumulated by the system and putting them into the proper buckets or proper jobs. So all you're doing is moving around the total hours. You're not messing with the employee punches, and that is perfectly fine to do, and that is exactly what we're asking everyone to do on a situation where a split is needed. Now, the manual splits are done off the time card view, and I'll show you some screenshots here momentarily, but once again, this is legal, quote unquote, and you will not be penalized to ePlay compliance scores or metrics as the original punches are not changed, because you are not making changes to the in or out punch, but rather the total time worked. So this involves straight hours. So you will go in there and be able to move around the hours as you need. So maybe you put 2 hours to one job, you put 30 minutes to another job, you put 4 hours to another job, etc. Employee is responsible for just punching in and punching out. So just as the theme has been all this webinar, is the employee still punches in, they punch out. What you would do after the fact is you would come into the system as an editor, submitter, approver. you'll take that total time and split it out as needed. So the example here shows 3 jobs. I want an hour going to job A, job B would have an hour, and job C would have the 2 hours. So you can move your time around as needed using the split function on the time card. So how do you get to doing this? Well, you go to the time card view first. You make sure that the employee has an in and out punch complete. So like the example here, this employee, Eric Nunez, happens to be a Houston employee that I'm using as an example today. This employee punched in at 7:35 a.m., punched out at 9:04 p.m., for a total of 13 hours and 30 minutes, okay? So what's basically happening is you have now the ability to say, you know what, this employee worked, did go work at that job, that 6620 Main Street, but he also worked 3 other jobs in the course of his busy day. And I need to get that allocated correctly because my budget's going to be wrong, and I don't need a call from my managing director saying that I'm over budget on this job, yada, yada, yada. So you understand here that you can go in now and go to that view details on the far left-hand side of the time card. And under view details there, and it's actually not the view details button, right next to view details is a little black arrow. And that little black arrow will provide you an option that you will be at the drop down and actually see an option for a split time card. So when I click on split time card, the system's going to now kick me into a different mode in which now I can actually go in and reallocate that time. And that's the word, kind of the term there. You're not, like, once again, messing with the in or out punch. You're going to leave the punch at 7:35. You're going to leave the out punch at 21:04. All you're going to do now is reallocate that time. And to do that, when I click on split time card here, which is number 2 on the process flow here, I now get this big screen. Now this screen allows me to see a before and an after section. So the before, as I see when I get into my split time card view, the split time card view is going to tell me that I have 13.29 hours that I need to reallocate as needed. Right now, all 13.29 are going to the first job and the first task of custodian. Okay? So all that's saying is right now, if I left it alone, my budget for this job is going to take a 13.5-hour hit as a custodian task on this particular job, 6620 Main Street. So what I could do is use the lines that are below that are available for me to go in there and create the perfect picture of the employee working that day. So if I look at the bottom of the screen now, on the bottom of the screen here, I now have the ability to see that I can code 5 hours on the right-hand side here to job A. So instead of doing all 13 hours, I'm just going to tell the system, instead of doing 13 hours, I'm going to adjust it to 5 hours. Okay. Then the next line, I'm going to go in and select the appropriate job that the employee works. So in this case, DHL Express. And I'm going to say he worked 3 hours there. Then I'm going to go and say, right now I have 8 hours. That means I still have 5 hours and 29 minutes to reallocate. So then I go to the next job, pick the same thing, next job, do 3 hours there. And then my remaining balance, he worked at the last job of the day, and he had 2.5 hours or 2:29 there. At the end of the process here, as regardless of how many lines you need, you can add, by default, first off, the view is only going to show three lines of available entry. However, if you notice there at the bottom left-hand corner of your grid, you do have a option for add row. So if I scroll down here at the bottom, I'll see add row. I can always add additional rows. There's no limit to how many lines I can go in there and allocate my time to. So add row is always there. But the bottom line here of split time cards is at the end of the process, the before and after have to be in balance. Otherwise, the system will not let you save these entries. Now, the way this works is once I have everything in balance, I hit save. You'll get little green dots next to each of these particular lines, letting you know that they were all accepted. There's no overlapping issues, or there's no issues with putting too much time or not enough time reallocated. And once you do that, your time card will be adjusted accordingly. So if you go back to the time card view, now you'll see one time card line for each of these lines that you've actually reallocated your time to. The in punch would be associated to the first line. The out punch would be associated to the last line or the last job that's available. That way you would see a progression. So kind of the way this works when you split time cards, it's going to take your start time, which is your 7:35, add your 5 hours to it, and that'll be your out punch on the first job. Then that out punch becomes your in punch for the next job. Then your next job will add the additional 3 hours to create your out punch, which then that out punch becomes the in punch to the next line, add your additional 3 hours, etc., and so forth until you get your total time up to that out punch. So your time card will look nice and neat after you've manually reallocated your time. Now that's a manual process. Now this split time card can be used at any time, any way, shape, form. You don't have to use it every day. You can use it on Mondays if the employee, didn't punch in or punch out. But once again, the split time card gives you the flexibility to reallocate the hours as you need. Now, for those on this call, you may be familiar, there's another type of split. And the other type of split that's in the system is called an auto split. Now, the major difference is the manual split this manual split that I just showed you via the time card view deals with straight hours. That basically means that I can reallocate whole hours. I can do 2.5 hours. I can do 30 minutes. I can do 6 hours. I can do, 3.25 hours. Those are dealing with hours. The auto split here is a function in Blueforce that allows you to set up the system to take the total time an employee works and automatically split that time up against multiple jobs. The key thing is automatically. What you would do is on the employee record, and I'll share some screenshots here with you momentarily. On the employee record, you would go in there and set up what I don't like calling it a schedule, but it essentially turns out to be a kind of a work plan, I will call it, for the employee. I can go in there and tell the system that these are the 4 jobs the employee is going to work. These are my percentages I want the system to break out the employee's time to on a daily basis. So the split is based on percentages, not hours, and that's a key thing to keep in mind. It's based on percentages because if it's automatic, the system you can never guarantee that an employee is going to work an exact 6-hour shift every day. You may work 5.5 hours a day. You may work 6.5 hours tomorrow. In either case, you cannot guarantee a specific amount of hours every day. So to that, it has to be percentages. So the employee is still responsible just to clock in and clock out. The system, in this case, will then take their hours and split it up accordingly. So if this is my example for my employee here at the bottom of the screen, and I had these 3 jobs that I want to set up as auto split, I would have job 1. I could say, typically the employee is going to work 1 hour there, typically. So I want 25% of his time to go to job A. Typically on job 2, that employee works an hour as well, so I want 25% to go into job B. And then you have job C, where typically the employee works 2 hours, and we want 50% of the time to work there. So on average, I built my percentages based on a 4-hour day. So what happens if today the employee has to stay an extra hour at job B? Well, the hours obviously are going to be off. That's why we need percentages. We can't tell the system, guarantee the employee 4 hours on every day when he might have the ability or might have that possibility more likely to go and work an extra 10 minutes, hour and a half, or maybe work less on a given day. So the system will automatically spread out those hours based on those percentages. And I think that is the best way whenever you have an employee who's always working the same set. Once again, here's that word again, schedule. The reason I don't like that word schedule is because this is not the scheduling module we have in Blueforce. It's simply kind of a work plan or daily plan for the employee. But once again, if the employee is working the same jobs on a day in, day out basis, to save them the hassle of clocking in and clocking out, you could have the employees be set up on an auto split there on their employee profile, which I'll show you here next, and then have them just punch in at the beginning of the day, have them punch out at the end of their shift, and the system will automatically split their time between for the whole day based on what we have set up. So it's a good tool to have in your back pocket should you ever need it. So all this is done from the Blueforce employee record. And once again, one of the questions I saw a little while ago pop in here, everyone on this phone call who is an editor, submitter, or approver has access to everything I've shown here on the splits, everything I've shown here on the auto split. So you have access to doing this yourself. I do have a document that I can make available online after our session, and I will share that link with everybody. That goes through the process of auto split and split time card. That way you have it for for your disposal, and you can go off and print it off and review it as needed. But bottom line, from the employee Blueforce employee record, you're going to go to the tab called Auto Split, and when you go there, it's going to be blank, just like this. First thing you're going to want to do is go over and click on Add New on the far left-hand side. You see a little link that says Add New. That'll allow you to go in there and set up your jobs as needed. Every time you go and add a new line, you have to add a row. The key thing to keep in mind here is in this particular example, this employee works pretty much a set schedule with the exception of Friday. So if you look at Friday, notice that every day during the week here, he works 25% of his time is going to go to job A, 50% is going to go to job B, and the remaining 25% is going to go to job C. So Monday through Thursday, he has a set schedule, but look at Friday. Friday he comes in and he only works 2 jobs. For some reason, job A maybe be closed that day, so job B and job C get a split of his time. This is perfectly fine. You can actually have every day of the week be a different set percentage, and we've done some complex ones. And I'll give kudos to our Austin office because we sat through and went through some complex auto splits with them because they wanted 5, 6, 7 jobs being applied on a daily basis. So it is possible to take this complexity. You can put decimals in here if you need to. You can say 16.2 hours, 16.2% percentage points go to job A, 49.7 go to job B, etc. If you want to. Not saying that you have to do that, but it's a possibility if you want to get down to that granularity of time allocation. But bottom line, once you go through and set up your auto split, the last thing is to make sure that it is marked as active up at the top left-hand corner. And like I said, make sure that your daily totals equal 100% at the bottom of the screen. And once you have that 100% accounted for down at the bottom, then you are set to start using this system. The next time the employee punches in, the employee will actually start falling under the auto split. So keep that in mind. Once the market is active, it is running and ready to go. The only catch here, as I said, is the employee has to punch in and punch out, and they have to punch into one of these jobs listed on the auto split. If they do not punch into one of the jobs listed on the auto split for that particular day, the system will ignore that auto split, and like all bets will be off. The employee's time would go wherever they punch in and out of during that day. So in saying that, if the employee has to move around to another job, maybe we have an auto split set up for the employee on Tuesdays, and he needs today, we have to have him coverage. We have an emergency, we have to move him over to another job to work there, cover a shift there that is not on this auto split. Well, in that case, if the employee gets moved to work on other jobs for the day, the auto split's not going to work. The auto split is going to be totally ignored, and wherever they punch in and punch out at that day is where the time is actually going to reside. So once again, auto split will work for any type of time collection. So if you're using the phone, mobile, Walter, it doesn't matter. The system automatically will take the time accumulated on that time device and automatically allocate it automatically based on how you want it to. So those are 2 types of splits. I bring it up because those are cool things that are available. Once again, everyone on this phone call has access to setting these up on your own. Now, focus real fast on 2 more pieces, and I think we'll wrap up our call today. So manual punches for the Walters. As I mentioned last week, just make sure that the clocks are working. Make sure they are plugged in. Make sure that the glass reader is clean and dry. And make sure they're accessible. And what I mean by accessible, I mean that obviously the door is unlocked to the office. Make sure that the broom closet is unlocked. Make sure they can get in the building on time. That's one of the big things we find also. If the clock is not accessible, the employees are not going to clock in. They're just going to get their equipment if that's available and start working, which is exactly what we want them to do, but at the same time, we need them to be on the clock. If for some reason, and I think it goes more outside the realm of someone from IT leading a webinar and telling you this, but from the operations side, from the risk management side, from safety, it's important that if there is a claim that someone does get hurt, that we have proof that they were working that day, and the best proof is having them punch in and punch out. So keep that in mind whenever we're going through that the clocks have to be accessible, much as any device has to be accessible to the employee to be able to be successfully punched in. Supervisor lead, we find also that if there is a time clock there at the site, it'd be nice if it's possible for have the supervisor or lead greet the employee, make sure they punch in and punch out before they themselves head out into the building to do whatever supervision work or actual work that they have to be doing on that evening. And then obviously make sure the employees are indeed registered. If they're not registered on the clock, they're not going to be able to use the clock, and that leads to manual punches, especially new employees. The new employees, and I'll share this with everybody, I don't have a slide or anything on this, but for those that are involved on this phone call, they're involved in the actual hiring of an employee or setup of an employee. Whenever those employees are marked as initiate hire, basically from the applicant training, when we basically go through the applicant record and say that we're going to basically plan on hiring them, and we change their status to initiate hire, the system will automatically create that employee record over in Blueforce for us. So from that standpoint, you do have the ability to see them in Blueforce. You have the ability at that point to then assign working jobs to the record. You have some abilities to do some of the basic stuff needed to get an employee started in the system. Once you're assigning a working job to them in the Blueforce employee record, then you can go to the clock that they're working on and register them on the clock. So there's things you can do before the employee is actually working in that site, even if it's the same day. Once you initiate hire, that process will create the employee record in Blueforce within the next 30-minute window. One thing I'd also like to share with you today is that a lot of you may or may not know this, but whenever you go to the employee screen, more specifically the employee search window in Blueforce, this is accessible by just clicking on the little employees icon from the main home screen. You go in here and just click search at the top of the screen. When you click search, it's going to pull up all the employees that you have access to seeing. Over the very far right, you will see a column labeled as fingerprint, and you'll see some say yes and some say no. The ones that say yes will identify to you that those employees have been registered at the clock. Those that say no mean they'll tell you the opposite, obviously, that they have not been registered. So if Julia Vargas on this particular example or Jenny Alvarez on this list complain that they can't use the clock, if you come here into Blueforce, you can see that they have not been registered. That is your key to tell the supervisor, the lead, you yourself, to get over to the job site and register them on the clock. So I want to bring that up because this is an important thing. It's called the employee search window. And once again, it's accessible by hitting employees. And then at the very top of the screen up here, just hit search. And we hit search at the top of the screen. It's going to automatically provide you a listing of all these employees. And you'll see on the far left-hand side here that you've got red little outlines for those that are no. And the reds I added, obviously, but anything that says no is stuff that you need to be brought to your attention, that those employees need to be registered. Now, keep in mind, those that do not use the clocks, like the mobile users, the phoning users, they're going to say no. But if they ever have the opportunity to possibly work at a job site that will require a clock, it's not a bad idea to have them registered in the system. That way you don't have to worry about them later. For phone-in, as I mentioned last week, please be aware that we want to make sure that the correct phone number is being used. But not only the phone number, but make sure the employees know that the correct phone itself is being used. Make sure that the employees understand where they need to go to clock in. That they use that same phone on a day-to-day basis. They don't go to the front gate and call in one day, and then go to the cafeteria and call in the next day, and then go to the another break room another day to call in, and then go to another office to call another day. Make sure they know the assigned phone that they're supposed to be using that's linked to our caller ID in the system. If it's cellular, make sure they have a good cell signal. We can issue cell phones all day, but we know that, and from a corporate standpoint, we use Verizon around the country. We do understand that in some parts of the country, Verizon may not be the best carrier. So keep in mind that make sure they have a good cell signal when they're trying to punch in and punch out. And all phone numbers that will be used for the job also need to be set up on the Blueforce records. That will be capture all the different caller ID combinations. So kind of going through here, I know I threw a lot at you during this webinar, but these are some of the ways we can improve manual punches. Now, all of us have been in contact with a point of contact on the ePay team, whether it be myself, whether it be Tiandra, whether it be Jade or Beth. But continue to work with us to assist you with with helping you out with the manual punches, some of the items that we talked about today. Manual punches is the #1 metric, and it's probably the one that is the lowest of all the different metrics. I think we went from a metric last week that was easier to fix, to this one. This one's actually really easy to fix. It's just that it's a little bit larger scope because it involves punches that employees may or may not be actually, complying with or doing. But bottom line, work with us and let us know how we can help you improve that manual punch score. Now, the question always comes up is, how do I get additional IPE support if I need to? Well, bottom line, we always like to refer everyone to the help desk because we have a ticketing system. We like to make sure that the queue is being handled appropriately. We want to know what issues we're experiencing in the field. So our first option is to always contact IT support. Make sure you go to the help desk. There's a link right there, and you can get this off of the presentations once I post them on the website. You can also call the IT help desk at 210-495-6093. And if you call the help desk, the help desk number there, a help desk ticket will be created for you. But bottom line, always put a help desk ticket in there because we want to ensure that the user requests don't get overlooked in an email box or a voicemail is left behind and we're not, for some reason, not checking voicemail. We want to make sure that your issues are addressed in a pretty quick fashion. Second option is IPE support directly. That's there for after-hours support and Walter issues only. And then if there's anything you need to contact them, you can do that via email or via a toll-free number there on the screen as well. So that pretty much wraps up our webinar for today. The same webinar will be offered again on Thursday at 2 p.m. Central. So if there's anybody from your team that did not get a chance to jump on today, have them join on Thursday. And then next week we'll continue the weekly series, Mastering Blueforce, with a look at time changes is our topic for next week. And hope we'll catch you again here in the next webinar. Thank you again.